Coming down in 3, 2, and 1. Well, good morning, everybody. Or is it haven't gone to bed yet? Maybe it's go get some rest and good nights. But it certainly has been an interesting last, oh gosh, guys, what's it's been, 15, 16 hours? The first round of the NFL college draft is in the books, one of the wildest ones we've ever seen. And for those of you who are Bears fans, it was simply sit back and watch and be entertained. But tonight is where it gets interesting for all of you. That's why we wanted to visit with you this morning. And if it's anything like last night, the problem now is that they're down to 5 and 3 minutes between these picks in the second and third round. And I have no idea how we could have kept up with that last night if we didn't at least have the 10 minutes per pick. Again, we appreciate you being with us. If you are right now on our StreamYard link or joined us via our Twitter accounts or YouTube, for those of you who are listening as a podcast, we welcome and appreciate you as much, but want to remind you that we do these podcasts, I should say, we record live and you can join. And the reason we like that is we can take your questions, you can participate, we can read your comments. And I'm guessing, well, I'm not guessing, I can see it already. There's going to be a lot this morning. It's going to get really interesting over the next 6 rounds tonight and all day Saturday. So thank you for being with us. And again, if you are just enjoying it as a podcast, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that at all. We just encourage you to go to the App Store on your phone or iTunes or shawlocal.com and download a subscription to the podcast so that it gets delivered to you automatically and you don't miss a beat. I am Hub Arkush, and I am joined, as I am each week, by our Shaw Media Group sports editor, Kyle Nabors, and our shawlocal.com Bears insider, Sean Hammond. And we're just going to talk for a minute or two here before we dive right into your questions and comments. And Sean, normally we're sitting next to each other, either in cubicles close out in the media room at Hallis Hall or next to each other in the press box. But last night we chose a couple different locations to work from. I was at Hallis Hall. You were working from a home office. And there was no reason to be at Hallis Hall last night. I don't think anybody expected the Bears to trade into the first round, but just seemed like a good environment. I'd say probably 60, 70% of the Bears media was there. Everybody will be out in force this evening. But you and I didn't really get to talk because it ended late by the time we finally filed copy. I'm curious for your general impressions of relatively new to this, just your third draft, I guess. So what struck you last night?
Well, that was wild. I mean, the trades were crazy. Obviously, the wide receivers are the headline, both the ones who were drafted and the ones who were traded. That was, I mean, we expected, I don't know about you, Hub, but you sort of got that feeling, after those first couple of receivers went off the board, you're thinking, okay, maybe this wide receiver run that we were expecting with the likes of the Packers and the Chiefs is happening a little bit early here. And it did, a bunch of those guys went off the board, for the most part in the first half of the draft. And then we got guys like AJ Brown and Hollywood Brown getting traded, veteran guys who, we weren't really even thinking about last night until we saw that come across the Twitter feed.
Yeah, certainly interesting. Although I would say, Kyle, that the 3 guys who went, what was it, 11, 12, and 13, or 10, 11, and 12, I had Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Olave, and Jameson Williams as my top 3 in that order, and did have a clear separation between them and the next group of 3 or 4. So that part of it did actually play somewhat close to form, not as surprising. But as we were talking both last night and again first thing this morning, nobody saw the A.J. Brown thing coming. It wasn't the most significant move of the night in terms of how it impacted the draft. But I wrote this last night, and all of our stuff, of course, always up at shawlocal.com. And by the way, even if you're not a regular, get there today because we're going to be posting on and off. I'm going to put together my list of at least the 32 best available athletes available. I may go to 50 because I think that'll be interesting to watch as they start coming off the board tonight. We won't get it in the papers, obviously, but it'll be at shawlocal.com. I know that's news to you, Kyle, but I will get it to you in time so that you can get it up there. I just was thinking this morning it'd probably be a good tool for fans to look at and see what they expect. What to me is fascinating about what the Titans did is I think it's a test case for what's going to be the new standard operating procedure in the NFL. They knew with what they were looking at. This is a playoff team. This is a team that played in an AFC title game 2 years ago, was a number 1 seed this year, got upset early by the upstart Bengals. But they knew that in order to protect what they think is a contending team, they couldn't pay A.J. Brown what they were going to have to pay him. And so they obviously worked as hard as they could to get something done. They realized they weren't close. They found an intriguing deal with the Eagles. They not only got a pick back in order to try and replace him right away, but got an extra 3rd-round pick. And interestingly enough, of the wide receivers, I had Treylon Burks 5th, which is where he went. He did. Did he go ahead? He went behind Jahan Dotson, I think, which really surprised me.
Dotson was ahead of him.
Yeah, that to me was the biggest reach of the first round on Dotson. But I had Burks, in that group in the first round, right about where he went. But he, of all the wide receivers in this draft, was the only one who resembled an A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel type move. So what they did was, instead of busting their salary cap and not being able to keep players that they need, they tried to replace him with a young clone and saved a ton of salary cap space and can now spend some more money to try and get better in other areas. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong, good or bad. We got to wait and see. But it's certainly creative. It's certainly dealing with the NFL, the salary cap as we know it right now. And I think you're going to see other teams start to mirror that kind of thing.
Yeah. First off, I want to say this as we get started. You may see me go on mute a few times here. I live in a townhome, and they were supposed to start replacing our roofs on Monday, and they showed up at 7 a.m. this morning and started banging away. I think they're already done with us. If we had started this half an hour earlier, it would have been a train wreck. But I think they're moving on, but I may have to, just as a heads up, if you guys hear something slam in the background, don't be alarmed. But yeah, I want to ask you guys, I mean, is this a new era of the NFL? Because you look at the what I would call silly money that the Jags gave Christian Kirk, and it kind of set off this cascade of moves at wide receiver. You saw Tyreek Hill, who was looking for new money, and Kansas City decided to trade him instead of paying him. A.J. Brown wanted a lot of money, and he got it in Philly. I had not heard anything about contract extension for Hollywood Brown, but wouldn't surprise me if that was the reason Baltimore decided to move on, was, they didn't want to have to pay him coming up here pretty soon. And Hub, I do think you're right. I think you're going to see teams, instead of paying these wide receivers, particularly when it's just an absolutely silly amount of money, that they're going to go ahead and cut bait, get what they can in trade, and try and just keep spinning that wheel.
I think there may be 3 different answers in there, if I could go first, Sean. Number 1 is no, I don't think Hollywood Brown is the same thing. I think that was different, and they realized that they're just being honest. Lamar Jackson may win a Super Bowl or 2 for him, but he's not going to do it throwing the football. That's not who he is. They're not going to be able to run a normal passing offense. And Hollywood Brown, in 3 years, it's not that he wasn't productive, but he never became the take the top off game changer for them that Tyreek Hill was in Kansas City, because Tyreek Hill had Patrick Mahomes, and it's, again, not a knock on Lamar Jackson. It's just who he is. It's the style. And they just saw an opportunity, where they thought, hey, maybe it's time to move on and adjust our plan and deal elsewhere. They will add other wide receivers, but more possession type wide receivers to handle him. Number 2, I do think that it is a new trend in the NFL to manage your cap this way, regardless of position. But number 3, we know how cyclical everything is in the NFL, and these wideouts getting this silly money is going to last a few years until they realize that the teams did not get the benefit of any of these goofy contracts that they just gave. I mean, Tyreek Hill cannot play up to that contract for 4 more years. And I love I don't love the guy, but I mean, as a player, to me, he is the most dangerous wide receiver in the league right now. But this happens at various positions, and it goes up, and then it starts to work its way back down. The cap will get back on a steady pace of increases, so there'll be money to spend. But the reason it's all going at the wide receiver position right now is because you have this half dozen guys, basically, when you look at Tyreek Hill and Deebo Samuel and A.J. Brown, and I'm forgetting who else just got paid. Well, Cooper Kupp is I think, the MVP. He needed to get paid, and he got less than some of these guys. So that part of it will work itself out. I don't think it's going to be unique to the wide receiver position, Sean, but I do think, again, it's a new trend in the NFL as teams learn how to manage this cap situation.
Yeah, certainly it is. And just one other, point to add to that too is, this draft in particular is not very top heavy in the quarterback position. And so whereas last year we saw teams like the Bears trading up to get a quarterback, there wasn't as much of that last night. And there's still, only one of them went last night. There's a bunch still on the board. Malik Willis is still there. Those spots got to go somewhere. And if people aren't taking the quarterbacks, then you're going to take the next, what's next on your list. And obviously wide receiver is a really popular choice right now.
Yeah, and forgive me, Packer fans, I'm not ignoring Davante Adams. I was just trying to rattle off names as I went. And obviously he, along with Hill, was he actually may have caused some of this in many respects. So
it's funny. I've actually forgot about the Davante Adams trade until you brought that up. There'd been so much movement in the wide receiver market that you start to forget about even big names.
Yeah, no, it's a little, well, and it's also, you know what though, Kyle, it's a special era for the position right now. As I mentioned, I think Cooper Kupp is the most valuable of the bunch, and we tend to not even talk about him in this group. And, we're at one of these cyclical stages right now where wide receivers, because of the way NFL teams have come up with their own adaptations of the air raid offense and the run and gun. That's not what this is, but they have definitely gotten a little bit away from the West Coast style and gotten back to the vertical passing game of the Al Davis Oakland Raiders days of the 70s and 80s. And that's the trend in the NFL right now. I expect the next big trend to be back to the running game. I think you're going to see running backs start to gain value again in the next couple of years, because that'll be one of the things teams have to do as defenses start to combat taking away these high octane wide receivers. So a lot of interesting stuff as you dig into this. I think the Packers, and by the way, I suppose I better do my mea culpa as well, Kyle. Nobody working on the roof, but one of our puppies got fixed yesterday, and so she's doing well. But if you hear somebody yorking in the background, the anesthetic is still doing a little job on poor Liza the puppy. So I'll just get that out of the way in advance too. But the other story that it's kind of quiet right now. Aaron Rodgers is on his best behavior, and we are not going to use this or any other podcast to relive my whole Aaron Rodgers saga of the first week in January. But it's clear that it hit him. It's clear that he's acting differently. It now begins to appear that it was really all about was the $150 million extension that he got, because now all of a sudden he's the class pet. He's texting all through the draft. With Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst, and he's not upset they didn't draft a wide receiver, and he understands what they're doing and blah blah blah. But what I would say to you, Packer fans, is the Packers made the front seven of their defense much better in round one. I think Quay Walker is a little bit of a reach, but Wyatt was great where they took him. And what they did was they let the board come to them. That's why Gutekunst and the Packers are so good. And by the time they came up, there's still plenty of wide receiver talent, but nobody that fit those spots. They didn't trade. They sat still and they took the best players available. And again, in a strange way, it could even be some small comfort to Bears fans. Yeah, you got to get wide receivers, but you don't have to panic and do it in the first round and overpay. And so I know that there's unhappy Packer fans out there. If you read all of Rodgers' comments, you can tell he's not real thrilled. But even he knows, that the trick is to build the best football team. It's not to go get the most expensive toy at the toy store, Sean.
I love that this wide receiver drought here has hit 20 years. That is just one of the craziest things, that the Packers have not drafted a receiver in the first round since 2002. Whether that's the right move or not, it's just hard to imagine a team doing that with any position.
I shouldn't do this, but I have to. My wife, God love her, she's listening and getting ready to leave, and she wanted to give me a really important note before she left. And she just wrote here, Aaron and Shailene just broke up again. Now, I don't really know who Shailene is, so I wasn't sure what she meant at first, and then suddenly it struck me. Yeah, she's telling me in the background it's his girlfriend. So I think they got tired of eating worms and bugs together, so they decided that's the end of that. And listen, I don't know either of these people. I'm not making fun of them. It's just they're in the public eye. They know you got to have fun with this stuff.
You look at the Packers. I really liked what they did yesterday, guys. Yeah. The front seven, the defense. When you had the wide receiver run, and really those top 6 wide receivers went off the board. There are guys that I think we all like that are going to be available here on day 2. But any of those wide receivers, I kind of felt would have been a reach at where the Packers were at. I mean, they're going to have a chance to get a wide receiver here in the second round, and probably a pretty good one at that. One of my big concerns about Green Bay over the last couple of years had been the front 7 of that defense, and they got a lot better last night.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I mean, again, I really like both picks, but Quay Walker's a project. I mean, he is not an NFL ready linebacker right now.
Yeah, so, he is a project, but I think there's tremendous upside there.
Yeah, no, I could, again, I think I said it first. I think they did the right thing. I think they got better. And one other thing I do want to talk about before we get to the comments, and we're going there in a minute, guys, comments and questions, is I think I was on the way to Hallis Hall. I forget where it was. And I had this thought occur to me. And because, I was getting ready to do nothing in terms of our Bears coverage. And so it occurred to me that there was one way that the Bears could have ended up in the first round last night. They will not say the word rebuild. And I understand why. If you listen to Robert Quinn's comments on accepting the Piccolo Award, the players that are going to be there don't want to hear that they're supposed to be bad, that they're not supposed to win. You don't want to be running around bragging about your rebuilding or tanking, because then you just get worse and worse. And so, what they're trying to do is rebuild, and they know they're not going to be very good, but they still want to compete every week and be entertaining. And so there's no way that they were trading into the first round with picks. But the one asset they have that might have commanded a first round pick was Roquan Smith. And then when you look at what the Titans did, you look at what the Chiefs did with trading Tyreek Hill, you look at what's happening in the NFL, nobody's being realistic about Roquan Smith right now. Now, I don't want to see him traded, and I didn't think he was going to get traded, and I didn't think the Bears were going to do it. But the point of the tweet that I sent out was the only way they could end up in the first round was because if they did, and would they consider it? Roquan Smith is going to be a free agent after this season. He doesn't have an agent, and he's shown no interest in redoing his contract right now. We keep asking about it. He's not worried about it. There's no guarantee that Roquan Smith is going to be a Chicago Bear next year, and you run the risk of getting nothing for him unless you franchise him. And even if you franchise him, he could be gone after next year, and this rebuild isn't going to be over in 1 year. So, yeah, you can build around him, but at the risk of getting nothing for him, if you could have gotten rich last night with a first-round pick and a few more, which is what would have taken, Ryan Poles had to listen. Now, I don't know if there were any calls. I don't know if anybody was going to pay that. But that was the point of the tweet that created so much consternation amongst a number of our followers here. It just, you guys know this by now. Twitter just annoys the crap out of me because there's no way that I suggested in any way what I wrote that they were going to trade him or that they should trade him. It was a conversation. I thought that was what Twitter was for. It was to go have conversations and exchange intelligent, thoughts. That's obviously not what it's for. So, guys, I'm glad Roquan Smith's not gone. I love the guy. But looking at what happened with A.J. Brown, what happened with Devontae Adams, what happened with Tyreek Hill, what's happening with great players all over the league, you better keep an eye on this. You can't ignore it because there's no guarantee that he's going to be back after next year.
Rick would be upset if the Bears made that trade, Hub. But I get it. I mean, I guess the question I would have for you is, what would have been an acceptable return? Like if those phone calls were taking place, like is just a first rounder enough? Like a first and a third? Like what would be a package that you would think making that trade would be worth it?
Well, I mean, you're talking about a 25-year-old all-pro linebacker, and it would have had to be from a team that thought they were a player or two away from being able to make a real run, a Rams type deal. And there aren't that many teams out there willing to do that. So they know that it's a tight market. So, again, guys, I want to believe from talking to Roquan that they're going to work this out and that he is going to be a player that they build around. But knowing that Roquan Smith has all the leverage right now. And so had somebody offered me maybe a 1 and a 3, or maybe a 1 and a 4 and a 3 next year or something like that, it would have depended on the team, and it would have depended on who was on the board. That was a lot of it too. It was only going to happen if it, just like the AJ Brown trade happened. So there's a lot of variables. I had an interesting text driving home last night. Ed was the first name. I don't remember the whole handle on. It wasn't a text. It was a tweet at me, who said, "Okay, so now what happens if the Cardinals call tonight and say they'll give you 40, 41, and 72 for Roquan Smith?" And I had to stop and think about that. My initial reaction was, let me sleep on it. I wouldn't do it right now, but this is where the wild cards come in. The Georgia Bulldogs had 5 defensive players drafted in the first round, and none of them was the best player on their defense. Nakobe Dean is still sitting there. Now, if a team calls me at 35 or 36 and Nakobe Dean is there, I'm sorry, if the Seahawks call me and Nakobe Dean is there, so now I'm going 38, 40, 41, and 72 tonight, I might do that. I mean, that's a rebuild. That eliminates the risk on Roquan. Nakobe Dean is not the prospect that Roquan Smith was 4 years ago, but he's not that far off, and he is the same type of player. So these are the kind of things that you have to think about. Just because the Bears have the most cap space in the league heading into next year doesn't mean they're going to be in good cap shape in 2 or 3 years. So once you start paying these guys, you get yourself back in a bind. You have to be managing it on an annual basis. So it's a long-winded answer to Kyle's question, Sean. It really depends on the circumstances of the moment. But that Seattle possibility, if you have to accept that they're rebuilding, whether they'll use the word or not. And that is a hell of a way to jumpstart your rebuild. If you get Roquan's potential replacement, potential match, and 3 more picks, plus the extra one you already have in the second round, you can really put a dent in building, whatever side of the ball you want to.
I do think the cap space matters in this situation when we're talking about Roquan. I mean, with Devontae Adams, with AJ Brown, we're talking about teams that have much more difficult cap situations than the Bears.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the insane amount of space they have over these next couple of years. And the other thing too is I don't know why I would be in any rush to make a deal like that, because, you can still get something done with Roquan in August. You could still get something done, next offseason before you're forced to decide if you got to franchise tag him. And then you can always franchise tag him. And I just think that there, even though Roquan shows no sense of urgency, that doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't want to get this done, and you have the cap space to give him pretty much whatever he wants
right now. But whatever you give him is going to eat up an exorbitant amount of your cap space. Now you can structure it somewhat friendly the first year or two, but as we learned with Khalil Mack, at some point you pay the piper. So, guys, at the end of the day, my answer is I don't think anybody would make me an offer enough to make me part with Roquan. So again, I'm trying to keep this from turning into, I want to move Smith and I'm an idiot. It's just, it's part of the business of the NFL. And these are considerations that you have to make, much like the Tennessee Titans did last night, because they got guys in their locker room that are really pissed right now, But if Treylon Burks turns out to be anything resembling, AJ Brown, they're going to look like geniuses, Kyle.
Yeah, they're going to look smart. I'm still processing this idea of trading Roquan Smith. I
think it's over now. I don't think it is. I think the whole idea was you didn't have a first round pick.
Yeah, the first. Yeah, I know. Overall, I get where you're coming from. I'm of the opinion that this rebuild is going to take a couple of years. So if you were able to if someone was willing to come up and overpay for Roquan Smith, I probably would have gone ahead and make that trade. But you guys want to dive into some questions here?
Yeah, as we do, again, just to put it to rest, that was the premise of the tweet. If someone's willing to come to you and overpay because they need them, then you got to think about it. So anyway, didn't happen, isn't going to happen. I don't see it as a day 2 or a day 3 thing. Now we just better hope that, Roquan's a mystery man. He's a great kid. He's a great football player, but he continues to not have an agent and show any interest in hiring one. And the concern about, he may be right because, God knows the agents end up taking millions of dollars from these guys, but the problem with that is if they don't get something done before August and he goes into the season without an agent, well, then he's going to get to free agency. And then you're either going to have to franchise him.
Well, they're going to franchise them. I mean, if they get to that point.
It depends on where the rebuild is. Again, I mean, it's how good are you at the end of next season? How close are you?
At that point, can't you do like a tag and trade anyway? Like if you were, I mean, if that was the case, if you're still worried about the rebuild, couldn't you just do a tag and trade?
I don't think so. The tag doesn't translate. No, I think you can tag him, and then if somebody makes an offer, they can negotiate a contract with him. But you can't send his tag to another team. Again, all I'm saying is he's got all the leverage. And you know what? I'm happy for him because he's a great kid. I'm glad he's got the leverage. I'd rather see him have it, than the billionaires. But it is the reality of the situation. So.
All right. Well, let's dive into some questions here. I'm going to start with Mark, who said, "Good morning, everyone. Wow, what a wild first day of the draft. I was really worried about Aiden Hutchinson going to Lions, but now after hearing Alex Brown, I realize he is a one-year wonder." Hub, you're a Michigan guy. Do you feel that way about Aiden Hutchinson?
Well, I mean, Alex is a dear friend of mine, but I don't know what he's been smoking because that's ridiculous. I mean, he's not a one-year wonder. He's a great college football player who I think is going to be a very good NFL player. I believe again, what we tweeted, what we wrote, it's all a blur right now. But I know at some point I said somewhere last night he should have been the number 1 overall pick because he is a top 5 ceiling with the highest floor of any of the picks that went last night. The problem with Trayvon Walker is that he may have the highest ceiling of anyone in the draft. I'm not arguing that point, but he also has the lowest floor. I mean, Trayvon Walker is in some respects even more of, or at least as much of a developmental prospect as his teammate Quay Walker we talked about with the Packers. He's not a pass rusher. He wasn't a pass rusher at Georgia. If you're the number 1 overall pick as an edge rusher and you're not an edge rusher, that's a problem. He plays the run as well as anybody. Aiden Hutchinson is a complete football player. He is an outstanding technician. He's got perfect size. He's a charismatic leader. He's everything you want. I just don't know at the next level that he's going to be a double-digit sack guy because he's not the special athlete that some of these other guys are. He's a very good athlete. But the comps that I came up with last night trying to think about it is I think the Lions may have Max Crosby or Sam Hubbard. I mean, these guys are really good defensive ends, but are still trying to get to their first double-digit sack season. And so with the number 2 overall pick, is that what you want? I mean, Max Crosby, I want to say was a 3rd rounder, and Sam Hubbard was a 4th rounder. So Hutchinson's going to be a really, really good football player, but I don't know if the production you see may not match the place where he was drafted, I guess is what I'm trying to say there, Sean.
Our favorite Detroit Lions.
Our favorite Lions fan.
Yeah, he's a very happy man this morning. Don Burr between Aiden Hutchinson and now I'm blanking on the wide receiver. Someone help me out here. Who'd they end up with that wide receiver? Detroit.
Oh, they traded up for Jameson Williams.
Yeah, Jameson Williams,
yeah.
Who I like a lot, but does have an ACL injury. Don Burr having himself a fine little morning with Aiden Hutchinson and Don Burr. But Sean, sorry, I guess I kind of cut you off there. I'll quickly say, out of the 3 kind of big names when it came to edge rushers, defensive ends, and like Kayvon Thibodeau was my favorite of the 3. I thought he had the highest upside. If I was Jacksonville, I would have taken him number 1, and I probably would have taken him over Aiden Hutchinson as well.
Interesting. Oh, were you going to say something, Hub?
Well, go ahead. Yeah, no, I can.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Hutchinson, kind of along what Hub was saying, is maybe the safest of the choices. I don't have a problem with the Jaguars going with Trayvon Walker. I mean, he may have been a little bit out of position with what he was asked to do at Georgia. If you look at his physical abilities, you can certainly see that he looks like the type of guy who could be really good off the edge. But yeah, it's going to take you're going to have to get him, in the right position and doing the right things. The Thibodeau, were you guys surprised that the Giants took him there and didn't go with the offensive lineman first?
No, I'll tell you exactly why that happened, because they knew that they were coming back 2 picks later, and both Ekwonu and Neal were
They
there.
could have either one they wanted.
Well,
one left.
Or Cross.
Either one left.
Yeah. See, to me, Cross was overdrafted. They all turned out to be great players. Yeah, but to me, Ekwonu and Neal are in a class of their own, and I like Neal the best. But Thibodeau, and again, I know I wrote this somewhere last night, of the 3, Thibodeau, Walker, and Hutchinson, I think what I wrote was, I'll bet anybody right now that Thibodeau has the most sacks their first 2 years in the league, and probably for his career. He is the best pure pass rusher of the 3, but he is nowhere near the complete player that Walker and Hutchinson are. And that's why, to me, Hutchinson was the pick. He's the best combination of all. He's probably going to be second or first best against the run. He's probably going to be second or first in sacks. And he has great leadership qualities. Now, Walker and Thibodeau are good kids, but some people are a little worried about the flash in Thibodeau, and Thibodeau is not the factor against the run. You're not going to see Thibodeau dropping into coverage the way you do with Hutchinson and Walker. Not that you're drafting a guy in the top 5 to be an edge rusher and drop into coverage. But I thought Thibodeau was the clear number 3, but I also thought that the Giants probably had the best first round of anybody, even better than the Jets, who did great coming back in and getting Jermaine Johnson. But I think Evan Neal, and this is always stupid to say, on the day of the draft, but it's fun, it's conversation, it's predictions based on what you've seen. I think if one guy from this first round ends up in Canton, it could be Evan Neal. That's how much I believe in that kid. And then Thibodeau, they had to get both, and it was a Jim Finks draft. 10 of the first 19 players, offensive and defensive linemen. Giants got one of each. Joe Shane in his first draft, he was highly sought after to be a GM. Well, he did it the right way. So I loved both of those picks. But to your point, Sean, I think the reason that they took Thibodeau, because he was ranked a little bit behind the other guys, but once with the Panthers behind them, they kind of thought that they would take one of them. And I think they thought that it would be Ekwonu because he's a local kid. And so they got, both guys that they wanted. I thought they played that really smart.
Yeah, good draft for the Giants. Rick Gonzalez, our guy Rick, checking in here with 6 wide receivers going in the first round. Should the Bears stay away from that position until later in the draft and address either cornerback, safety, or offensive line? Sean, I'll start with you on that one. Looking at the board going into tonight, do you think the Bears hold off on wide receiver, or is there someone there that you would jump at?
It wouldn't surprise me to see them hold off on wide receiver. I mean, it kind of depends what they think about, the North Dakota State kid or a George Pickens, and if they like those guys at 39. I like some of these defensive backs who are still on the board. If you want to get a Jalen Petrie at safety, or if you're looking at Andrew Booth or Kyler Gordon at cornerback. But with everything we've heard from Ryan Poles, I still think the safe bet is to say that they go for an offensive lineman, just based on what we've heard from him. But it comes down to how much they like these wide receivers who are there. They can certainly get one later.
Yeah, my answer is a real simple no. I'll be disappointed if one of the 2 second. Well, first of all, if they don't make a trade, it may be the biggest upset of the draft. I mean, the way this is going, and what Poles wants to do. So we think we know where they're picking, but at 38, 49, and 71, if they get out of the 3rd round without a wide receiver, I'll be very, very disappointed. It is just such a screaming need. And the other thing about to the initial point of the question, since 6 went, I had 6 going into the draft. I think we all did. We knew what this class was. And these wide receivers kind of end up in trenches or in groups. And so, the first round guys went. I thought Dotson should have gone to the 2nd round. I thought there was a chance Christian Watson could have snuck into the bottom of the 1st round. But other than that, the next category of wide receivers are the guys we've been talking about the Bears taking in the 2nd or 3rd round all along anyway. I mean, Christian Watson's still there. Alec Pierce is still there. I like Jalen Tolbert a lot. These guys are all, possibly 2nd or 3rd round picks. So nothing changed, I guess, is all I'm saying about the wide receiver need. There's not as many good offensive linemen as I had hoped. A few more went, but you still got Bernhard Raymond out there, who's going to be interesting. Bernhard, I should say. Guys, there's going to be a trade before we get to Hallis Hall tonight. What happens is that after these guys, go into the night and they see what's happening and they restack their boards, there's going to be a couple teams that see first round picks they didn't think would be there. And coming up first tonight, you've got teams that already made trades yesterday. So we still don't know what's going to happen at 38. And my guess is that if somebody's willing, the Bears may not end up picking until into the 40s, because I do think that if you want to, acquire picks, you get what you can get the most value for. So it's that 38th pick that could be the most targeted. So we'll see where they're going.
So Hub, you just said 38th pick, and I've been doing that myself. I keep transposing the numbers. It's actually 39th, right, Sean?
39 and 48. Yeah,
39 and 48.
Yeah.
I keep doing that myself. I said it several times during the live stream the other day, and I think I tweeted it as well because I'm an idiot. But 39 and 48, and Mike Johnson. Well, quickly, before, I will say on wide receivers, I would have interest in Christian Watson if he's still there at 39. There's no other wide receiver still on the board that I would want at 39. I am a bit concerned about offensive line, Hub. There was a bit more of a run than I expected there.
I don't mean to interrupt, Kyle, but just really the two big disappointments for me. I didn't think Kenyon Green would get to 39. I thought he would get to the top of the second round, but I really was hopeful that Tyler Smith would be there. And obviously it's because he shouldn't be there. He's a great player. And when you look at, I am not a Jerry Jones fan. I think that's well documented. But few teams have drafted better on the offensive line over the last decade or two than the Dallas Cowboys have. And so Tyler Smith and Kenyon Green both gone as a disappointment. I had them taking 2 offensive linemen in the second round and a wideout in the third round. Now I think, circumstances could dictate one of each. Have no problem if they take a safety. Guys, I know I'm in a small minority here, but I don't think the need at corner is as screaming as it is at wide receiver and offensive line and safety, So again, if they take one, it's because they believe that's where Jalen Johnson, not only did Jalen Johnson go 51, but Trayvon Diggs went 52, and so the two best corners I'm losing track already. It was last year, wasn't it? So it was 2 years ago, right?
2 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, but the two best corners in the 2020 draft went at 50 and 50, or 50, again, the numbers 51 and 52 or 50 and 51. I think it was 51 and 52. I won't be upset if they take one, but I just don't put corner in the same category as wide receiver, offensive line, and safety.
Yeah, I agree with you. Dr. Earl had asked, how do you all feel about Sky at wide receiver? I'd be more interested at 48 than 39. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to follow that up here because Mike Johnson, and I do think this is becoming more of a realistic scenario. What is the value of the 39 pick if the Bears choose to deal it? Hub, based on what you know of the trade chart, what do you think the Bears could get if they decided to trade down?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the trade chart in front of me, and once you get past the first 15, 20 picks, it gets kind of complicated. But I think that, and again, it depends on how low you're going. That's the other issue. It's all about each pick of the 262 picks in this draft is assigned a value on the trade chart. And so if the Seahawks at 41 want to come up, well, the Seahawks have 40 and 41. So the only reason to trade with the Bears is to jump the Bears for somebody they think they're going to take at 39. That could command, quite a bit. I would think that would be 41 and a third rounder, and I would absolutely do that, But now if it's the Packers, the good news about the Packers and the Bears situation is they each have 2 second rounders, but both of the Packers second rounders are behind the Bears 2 second rounders. So if you're competing for wide receivers, you've got the edge on them. Now, if the Packers have got a wide receiver that they've targeted and they want to come up from, I want to say 56, they're just guessing from memory here, 56 to 39, that's going to command a lot more value because, it's a much bigger drop. And so it just depends on who the team is and what they're trying to do that's going to be your trade partner.
Yeah, it depends on who the team is. And that's an interesting scenario with the Seahawks, Hub, that you mentioned. The Seahawks are one of those teams who could be looking for a quarterback and need to figure something out long term at that quarterback position. If a guy like Malik Willis is still there come 39, you might be fielding some calls from somebody to try to jump the Seahawks and get their quarterback. That's one scenario. I do think it's likely that the Bears try to trade down anyway. I mean, 39, that is your biggest asset. You are going to get the most for that pick, and you may not have to drop all that far, and you could potentially pick up an additional 4th round pick in the process.
I believe the Jaguars and the Jets traded the 33rd and 34th pick, so I'm not even sure who's holding them right now, but depending on who it is, if they don't need a quarterback, I got to believe somebody's trading up to 33 to take Malik Willis.
Here's a list. 33 is Tampa, 34 is Minnesota, 35 is Tennessee, 36 is the Giants, 37 is Houston, and 38 is the Jets.
So, I mean, I would think that that Minnesota and the Giants would think hard if Willis was still there. Whether they'd come up to do it or not, I don't know. But again, looking at that list, you're talking about teams with all kinds of different needs, beyond what the Bears have. And so I don't know, who's trading up to do what, quite frankly. I mean, the fact that we knew that there were 6 or 7 quarterback needy teams, and that Pickett was the only one off the board. If Willis is the only one that goes before 39, you could have a team trying to come up to 39 for Cross or Howell or somebody like that. And so that gets a little more desperate. That maybe, what we always do is we look at the trade. And by the way, there are 3 different versions of the trade chart. They're all fairly close, but they're not the same. So then it becomes a question of which chart do you trust the most. But at the end of the day, as soon as these trades happen, you're looking at the chart and it's just simple math. It's addition and subtraction. You look at the point values and teams are always trying to win. If all the quarterbacks or all but Willis are still there at 39, that could be the Bears' best hope, to get a really good deal where they get more than they should from somebody who wants a quarterback.
Yeah, let's see here. CC Bell 1982 said the first 6 picks tonight match up pretty well with the quarterbacks and running backs who didn't go in round 1. What potential runs do you see in those picks leading up to 39 that would help the Bears the most? Hub?
Well, I mean, either one, because they don't really want a quarterback or a running back. So, I mean,
is there? I guess his question is there any other positions that you could see a run on early that might help get the Bears to any of the positions?
Well, that's the bad news is that there probably is going to be another mini run on the offensive line because everybody wants them, everybody needs them, and that got a little deeper yesterday than anybody expected. So, again, I wanted to focus on last night and get ready for this visit. And as soon as we get off, going to start looking, at who's available, best available, what teams are doing. But what didn't we see last night? I think Lewis Sine and Kyle Hamilton were the only safeties off the board, and safety unusually is one of the deeper positions in this draft. And so there could be a little mini run at safety. Oh, Daxton Hill went late. Daxton Hill went to the Bengals, yeah. But there's still 3-4 really good football players there. Again, I don't see a run, but I'll tell you, Nakobe Dean is coming off the board early. And actually, the run will probably be at cornerback because as much as Gardner and Stingley went 4 and 3. And then McDuffie eventually came off the board, and then was it Khair Elam? I think it is, from Florida. You still got Kyler Gordon out there. You still got a number. There's some pretty good corners.
Yeah, so Andrew Booth is still out there. I really like Kyler Gordon. I think he's going to come off the board pretty early tonight. Really quickly, I'm going to sidetrack us here because this isn't a viewer question, but I did find it interesting when you did your mock draft yesterday, Hub. I mean, I know you love Nakobe Dean. Do you think that? I mean, he's one of the best defenders on that Georgia defense. You thought he potentially was a top 15, 16 pick, but you had him at number 32 in your draft.
Yeah.
And obviously he did fall. And I hadn't heard anything pre-draft. I guess maybe I didn't pay enough attention, but I actually had a friend text me too and asked, why is Dean falling? I said, well, Hub thinks he's a mid, first round pick and even had him mocked at 32. So my question, I guess, is what led you to mock him at 32? Why did you think he was going to fall?
Because of what teams were telling me about where they had him on their board. And you have the conversation and everybody agrees that he's an exciting athlete. The problem, what separates him from Roquan, It's hard to put consensus grades on these guys because different teams use different grading systems. Some are color coded, some are more numerically based. And then you get into the draft nicks, so to speak. I think there's probably 50 of them out there right now, but there are 3 or 4 or 5 who I really do trust. Daniel Jeremiah and Lance Zierlein for NFL.com are both really good. They both come from NFL backgrounds and they know what they're doing. Dane Brugler, who's at The Athletic right now, I think does a really good job. So the guys that I know do the work. Rick Saratella is another one. Rob Rang, you look at these guys, they all tend to use the same number system. And so if you start to try and composite all this, Roquan coming out was somewhere between like a 6.85 and a 7.10, which is perennial Pro Bowler, possible All Pro. Dean, the composite I was getting was more like a 6.4 to a 6.5, which is a quality starter, potential Pro Bowler. So that's kind of the difference. And then if you look at what you're trying to do in the draft, that's why they start to fall the way they do. I thought, I'm trying to remember now, but I had him as I want to say either 17th or 18th best player in the draft. But everything I was hearing told me that I like him more than most, and this all becomes meaningless on the first Thursday after Labor Day, once they start playing for real. But that's kind of how I got there to where I was. I'm not shocked that he's still there, but I talked to enough teams that did agree with me that thought he was somewhere between 18 and 24. That I thought one of them would have pulled the trigger, and it was the way things fell. This is what I say. There's so much work to do here. Now I got to go back and look at who did go 18 to 24, and that's where you start to understand why all this is happening. I mean, I just don't know in which order and which teams they went to, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think Tech FMJ answered his own question here, but how come there is such a necessity for offensive line when you drafted 2 linemen last year? They are both unproven, and if they do decide to draft one, he also will be unproven. Well, that is true, but that's why you also need to draft one, because those 2 offensive tackles you have that you drafted last year are unproven, and there's no guarantee that Tevin Jenkins and Larry Borom are going to work out. So when you let James Daniels go, there's a lot of uncertainty on this offensive line, and you need quality young players because I think you're going to have to mix and match, and some of these guys aren't going to work out.
Yeah, Tech, a couple things there, but I don't mean to jump you, Sean, but as we were standing there at the voluntary minicamp last week, the thing that we were talking about that kept jumping out is when you see Larry Borom at left tackle and Tevin Jenkins at right tackle and realize that nobody in charge, not the coach, not the GM, drafted them, even though it was last year, you don't know how they feel about them. But then even more than that, when you see Dakota Dozier and Sam Mustipher swapping first team reps at right guard, they're not set at 3 of the 5 starting positions. I am delighted to see that they're starting with Borom on the left and Jenkins on the right, because I loved Jenkins as a right tackle prospect worth trading up for at 39 last year. It never occurred to me that they were going to play him on the left side. And you keep talking about it, and I just don't see him as a left tackle. Larry Borom, according to a lot of people I trust, was a 2nd or 3rd round prospect as a guard, but nobody saw him as a tackle at all because of his body type prior to the time between the combine and the draft when he got serious about it and changed himself, and we found out what a good athlete he is. So I'm intrigued by the possibility of Borom, being a pretty good left tackle. The other thing you got to realize about Tevin Jenkins is before he ever got to the football field, he had a back surgery. And from somebody who's had 3 back surgeries, I can tell you that when you're 6'8", 320 pounds, and you got back issues, that is a bad recipe. And so a lot of guys have had happen to them what happened to Jenkins, and went on, had great 10, 12, 14-year careers. But there's just so many questions about these guys. And then the last piece, not to filibuster here, Sean, is that Ryan Poles can't be any more clear. He believes it's the most important aspect of his rebuild is you start with the offensive line, and he has said it. And he said, he didn't say these guys aren't good or can't play, but he said that I think we need more, that he wants to change the style a little bit, that he wants to get lighter and more athletic. So I think the Bears have been unusually clear in acknowledging, how great they think their need is on the offensive line.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the guard position tonight. And, I think, going out there and seeing Sam Mustipher and Dakota Dozier in that right guard spot says a lot. And that's clearly one of their biggest needs on this entire football team. I'm looking at guys like Kentucky's Darian Kennard or Georgia's Jamari Sallier, potential second round picks who could fill that need. They could jump right in and take that right guard spot from those guys. And, I lean away from the tackles a little bit based on what we saw last night, just because so many of them are already off the board. But that's certainly a possibility as well.
And Kyle, one other thing, if I could just, I don't mean to jump on you, but
yeah.
If you watch enough tape from last year, there is no clear indication that Lucas Patrick is going to be better at center than Sam Mustipher. He was brought here because he fits that style that Ryan Poles wants, and Ryan Poles loves his temperament. But I don't even know if they're better at center right now. And as much as I think Mustipher can play center in the NFL, I don't think Sam Mustipher is a guard. I don't think he has the play strength or the base for that.
Yeah, I agree with you. If Sam Mustipher is going to start in the NFL, it's going to be at center. One name that I want to throw out here for you guys is Sean Ryan. This guy that played, I believe he played left tackle at UCLA, but he's expected to slide inside to guard at the NFL level. Does someone that has a bit of versatility like that hold extra value to a Bears offensive line that's really in flux?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's why people loved Tyler Smith. He was a tackle at Tulsa, projected as a guard. I think, obviously the biggest name out there, the most intriguing name, I should say, maybe not the biggest, is Bernhard Raymond. He's converted tight end who I haven't seen a lot of 6'8" guards, but I've heard teams say that they may still want to, start him at guard and let him work his way back out to tackle. So, but yeah, I think they're one thing about Cody Whitehair is that he has played every position on the offensive line, all 5 of them. One thing about James Daniels is that he had a higher ceiling at center than he did at guard. Jermaine Ifedi was both a tackle and a guard, and Borum is a tackle and a guard. So all teams love that position flexibility, and I think that's why Ryan will probably get drafted a little higher than he should, because honestly, he's an interesting prospect, but he wasn't a great player at UCLA.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy if he's still there at 71.
DTS Holmes, how likely is it that the Bears use one of the first 2 second-rounders to address a 3 technique? I don't think it's very likely, but is there anyone that kind of snuck into the second round here that you guys thought would be, or that I guess is falling maybe a little bit, that if they were there that at 39 or 48, that would pique your interest?
Well, who's the kid that we got asked about Wednesday who I said I didn't love as much? Travis.
Is it Travis Jones?
Yeah, Travis Jones. Was it
UConn?
Yeah, I believe he's still there, and some had him at 31, and so some think that he's a value at 38. I don't know that he's a pure 3 technique as part of my issue, but you went out and got Justin Jones because you think he's intriguing. Mario Edwards Jr., if he's going to be on the team, and I think he is basically a 3 technique. I mean, he's an interior pass rusher, and he's not going to play the anchor tackle. He's not big enough or stout enough against the run. So, that's why I keep harping on this rebuild thing. There's not a position on the field, including quarterback, that the Bears can't get better at. I mean, everybody's anointed Justin Fields based on nothing but hopes and dreams from what we saw last year and his traits. And I still like him, and I still think he can be the guy. Let's not go there. But the point is, there's no position that the Bears should ignore. This should absolutely be acquire as many picks as you can and draft the best player available every time you actually make a pick.
Roger Simonson, if they take Logan Hall, he will make a big impact on the D-line for years to come, in my opinion. What do you guys think of Logan Hall?
It's interesting because people are talking about him like a Swiss Army knife on the defensive line, can play anywhere. Some people are projecting him inside. I had him as a pure kind of, 4-3 defensive end. Right now, the hope is that that's Travis Gibson and Robert Quinn, and then Al-Qasim Karim Muhammad. So even if Quinn does eventually move on, is Hall and Gibson is basically a prospect himself. Is Hall a better prospect? I don't know. It's I saw some tape. looked pretty good, and then I saw some other tape where he looked kind of pedestrian, and some of it was because he was moving around so much. So that'll be curious to see.
I could see the Bears pulling the trigger on a defensive lineman at like a 3 technique. I don't think they're going to go for someone that's probably going to end up on an edge position. I'm trying to thinking of guys that kind of are edge. I think he's at a linebacker position for the Bears now. Although I can't find the question. Oh no, here it is. Jeff Dietrich had asked. Sorry for the non-draft question, but curious if Hub has any insights on the new regime's plans for or feelings on Charles Snowden.
I loved Charles Snowden as a priority free agent last year. And even though he was an exclusive rights free agent, he was one of the first guys that got his tender and got re-signed. What's interesting about him is at 6'7", 245, he was an outstanding athlete and showed traits as an edge bender at Virginia in college, and has the frame to grow into a 4-3 defensive end. He was brought here by the last regime because he also had the potential to be a really intriguing outside rush linebacker in a 3-4. So I have to believe that they want to spend a year on him and see if he can grow into a big time NFL defensive end. I think the concern, Sean, is that all of the intrigue about him has been his athleticism and his pass rush potential. If you're going to play 4-3 end, you got to play the run, and that I don't know that that's his strength, but I do think that this regime is at least intrigued in seeing what they have in him.
Yeah, I definitely think they're going to give this another year, whether that's likely on the practice squad. It kind of comes down to whether he can put that weight on and get a little bit bigger and keep it on, because that's a big thing with him. As you look at him, and he's kind of he looks, he is a big dude. Obviously, he's in the NFL, but he looks like a stick figure compared to some of those other guys at that position.
Guys, I tend to assume with Bears history and great NFL lore that everybody knows the stories, but then I remember how old I am, and I realize a lot of our audience may not have heard the story. But Richard Dent, of course, is in the Hall of Fame right now in Canton, and Jim Finks found him in the 8th round out of, it was either Tennessee State or Tennessee Tech, something like that. And what they were intrigued about with him is that he was this 6'5", 230-pound defensive end who showed all these great traits, but had not produced on him in college, and so I don't know if they brought him in or just did their research or whatever, but they discovered that he had some pretty serious dental issues, and so they drafted him. And the first thing they did was they got his mouth fixed, and the next thing that happened was he put on 40 pounds and became a Hall of Fame defensive end. So sometimes it's these little things that we're just not aware of. I'm not saying there's any of that with Snowden. But that's kind of what you look for. He's been in the weight room now. His first off season in the NFL, I should say, he's in the weight room right now. I know a lot of people swear by this James Arthur, who was with the Bears before under Lovie Smith, the new strength and conditioning coach. So I'm really interested to see what Charles Snowden looks like on the first day of training camp. I'll be surprised if he's not 15 pounds bigger than he was last year.
Going back over to the off, actually quickly before we do that, CJ asked if does Jeremiah Tachu make this roster as an end?
I was surprised he was still around, guys, because he's another classic kind of outside rush linebacker. But he did a 2-year deal last year, and it's near the minimum, so there's no reason not to have him here. You need roster spots filled, but he's just not a natural 4-3 fit, So. Sean, if I forced to make a guess now, I'd say no, probably not. They're probably better off trying to develop a youngster. But, again, in this situation, you don't rule anything out. He does bring a veteran presence, and he can be a factor rushing the passer from the end. He's not going to play the run for you. Yeah,
he doesn't exactly fit the system, but I do think he'll probably still be around. He's not going to be your starter. He's not going to be, unless somebody goes down with an injury, he's not going to be one of your featured guys, but I have no problem with them keeping him for some veteran depth.
I'm not going to lie. I completely forgot he was still on this roster.
And we did see him. He wasn't practicing last week, but we did see him along the sideline. So hopefully his injury is coming along.
I keep forgetting about him, but then I see that number 50, which is not a number I'd expect on him. And I keep going back to the roster to see who it is, and it's still him. So, it's
CC Bell here, and here's a name that I'm going to butcher. Nicholas, do you guys know how to say the last name here?
Petit Frere?
But yeah, Petit Frere. Yeah, just like
Petit
it's
Frere, okay.
A good French
yeah.
name.
I am terrible with names. There's a reason I write and I don't usually get in front of a camera or on the radio. But anyway, he's a very interesting prospect to see, Bell. With our second rounder, only 1 year at left tackle, but he did well. It's Ohio State, and he played right tackle for Fields, so familiarity is already there. Thoughts on him as a potential fit?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can tell you there is both him and the other Ohio State tackle, whose name is escaping me at the moment. They're both, potential day 2, maybe high day 3 picks. Both were 5-star recruits, coming out. And it's not that they didn't play well; it's just that they never developed to the Ohio State standards, and so they become a little more developmental. But the interesting piece of clay, and it really depends on how many picks you acquire. If they were to end up with just 39, 48, and 71, it probably wouldn't be one of my first choices. But if they end up with maybe multiple third rounders, then yeah, I do think he'd be worth taking a flyer on.
Yeah, I think he's probably going to end up in the 3rd round. And speaking of the 3rd round here, Dreamer asked, does Pierce, referring to Alex Pierce, last till 71? My short answer is no. But what do you guys think? Hub?
I was going to let Sean go first on that one because I'm going to.
I think it's possible, but if we see, if we see another second round run on receivers, wow, that's really hard to say. He may be off the board by the time you're at 71. I feel like there's a chance that he could be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think he should be there, and that's why I deferred. I don't want people getting mad at me. I love the kid. I know he's Glenbard West. That's where, by the way, we were talking about O'Shaughnessy the other day, Kyle, and I got confused by Glenbard West, and it's because Pierce was at Glenbard West. But I think because of what we've been talking about, so many teams with dramatic needs at the position, he is in that second tranche. I mean, to me, he's closer to the bottom of that group. I do think he'll definitely, I shouldn't say definitely, I really believe he'll be there at both 39 and 48. But I'm not positive he lasts to 71 only because of the need from so many teams. And let's not forget, I mean, the comp on him, everybody's comparing him to Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp was a 3rd round draft choice out of Eastern Washington. And so, I love the kid. I'd love to see him as Chicago Bear. I think he'd be a good fit. But I think it's all about, again, where you actually end up picking and what the other value at other spots is. I'm going to keep saying it. People are going to shoot me before this weekend's over. Get as many picks as you can and take best player available with every pick you have. And as you're moving around like that, I just don't know that he's going to fall to them depending on where those picks come up.
I'll give my thoughts on that quick, but just want to say one more time before if we get past an hour here, if we've missed your question, throw it in the chat one more time as we wrap it up. We'll try and get to it. Based on everything we saw out of the first round last night, and the way wide receivers gone this offseason, I expect that there's going to be another run on them here in the 2nd round and early 3rd round. Just looking through names like Christian Watson, Sky Moore, the kid from Alabama, Mechie, John Mechie, the 2nd or the 3rd, I can't ever remember. George Pickens, Pierce, and even Jalen Tolbert. I think all 6 of those guys are probably
Tyquan
gone.
Thornton. I mean, there's all kinds of names you can keep throwing out. Guys, if I can just jump, go ahead, Kyle. I'm sorry.
I think those 6 guys, I'm pretty confident are going to be off the board by 71. After that, I think it starts to get a little hairier, because then you start getting into guys like Calvin Austin and Wan'Dale Robinson who are really small. David Bell, who has some, I think there's some upside there, but there's definitely some question marks. But those top 6 guys I listed, I think are all going to be going by 71.
Yeah, for all the people who are in love with David Bell, I'll tell you who he is. He's Daz Newsome, and hopefully Daz Newsome will become a player. We don't know, but prospect-wise, that's kind of who he is. And I think Newsome went in the 6th round. Guys, I am not a Sky Moore fan. I understand, what everybody sees or thinks they see, but it's just kind of the combination of size and contested ball ability and a lot of things. And then you look at the level of competition. I do think he's going to go in the 2nd round or early 3rd, but I would not be overwhelmed. The other thing that I'm kind of focused on here is that, the Bears not only have one of the worst wide receiver rooms in the league right now, they have one of the smallest wide receiver rooms. They got to get some size at the position. And that's why Alec Pierce intrigues me so much. I agree with you, Kyle, but Sky Moore is a guy who kind of nags at me a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think Sky Moore would be a good fit for the Bears, but I do think he's going to get taken in the second round. I love Christian Watson. I shouldn't say love. For the Bears' needs, I love Christian Watson. I don't think he's a slam dunk of a pick. I just think he's a good fit for the Bears with what's remaining on the board. I don't know if he's going to even get to 39 though.
I was just gonna say, I'll make you a friendly wager here, guys. I'm gonna guess that Christian Watson goes 37 or 38, and I just don't see the Bears moving up. It's not consistent with what they want to do.
Yeah. Let's see here. James Schmidt. We've kind of talked about this before, but just really quickly hitting out. Why don't the Bears trade Robert Quinn for draft capital? Because he's more valuable than what teams are willing to give up for him. Pretty much, you only got a second for Khalil Mack. You're not going to get that for Robert Quinn, most likely. There's just the extra year. I think we talked about this the other day, right?
Well, yeah. One of the things about Robert Quinn that nobody realizes, and I think Sean will echo this. Feel free to disagree with me if you don't. He's one of those quiet leaders, lead by example. But he is the leader of this defense and this football team right now. I mean, Eddie Jackson's willing to talk the talk, but he hasn't walked the walk, the last couple of years. And Jalen Johnson is still ascending, and so it's Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn's defense, and it's also your pass rush. I mean, Robert Quinn at this point is more than half your sacks. You're not going to, if all you got was a 2 this year and a 6 next year for Khalil Mack. I don't know that anybody's going to offer you more than a 4 or a 5. And what's the upside in that? You can trade around with your own picks and get an extra 4 or 5. So I'm not saying it won't hit. If it doesn't happen tonight, it's not happening tomorrow. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's, right now. And then there's the curiosity factor. You went from 2.5 sacks to 18.5 sacks. He's one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Does he have another double-digit sack season in him? Since he did it with Khalil Mack gone for 60% of the season last year, there's no reason to say that that's going to be a factor. So I just think he's worth more to you, Sean, than what you're going to get for him.
Yeah, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen tonight. But I don't necessarily see it happening. And, Robert Quinn is kind of like your super chill friend who's always there for you. And I feel like the players in that locker room really respect him and they like having him there. And listening to Alan Williams, the new defensive coordinator, introduced him for the Piccolo Award. And he was saying all these great things that people in the building were saying about Robert. And, that's not necessarily a reason to keep a guy. We know it's a business, but he's a really important part of that locker room. And, when you're getting 18 sacks in a season too, which maybe he's not going to, you don't know if he's going to replicate that next year, but he's going to give you something. And that's really, he is your pass rush at this point.
And the one other thing, Kyle, and I know you get an hour 6 now. I'm not sure how much longer we're going to go, but when you watch practice, the 2 guys on the field who everybody else followed around were Khalil Mack and Robert Quinn. And at any point in practice, you would see, if not 1, 2 or 3 of the younger players going to him for this or going to him for that. And that's a benefit. And now Khalil Mack is gone. And so that's a real benefit, especially to a new coaching staff that is getting to know these guys themselves. And one thing about Robert Quinn is as Sean said, as chill and laid back and quiet as he is, the fact that he is so admired by his teammates, it's just a good fit right now, So with where they're going, it's not going to be a disaster or a huge shock if they do deal him, but it just doesn't feel like it makes sense right now.
Another trade question here from Mark. Any word on Nick Foles' trade for draft picks?
Yeah, nobody's willing to give one up because they know they're going to cut him. It's. I understand, Ryan Poles saying that Trevor Siemian is a better fit for the scheme that they're running. But anybody who wants to tell me that Trevor Siemian's in the same league as a backup quarterback as Nick Foles just doesn't know football, And so I thought maybe with the new regime it would be a fresh start. He was not Ryan, but he was Matt Nagy's guy. And yet something happened between him and Nagy, and I'm pretty sure I know what it is, but I don't want to compromise any sources. It's not important what it was, but something clearly happened, and that relationship went south. And so I thought maybe, well, he's under contract. The horrible cap part is gone. That maybe he gets a chance to at least function. And by the way, Sean, we've also heard that he's he's Justin Fields' closest confidant. That it wasn't Dalton. It was Nick Foles that Fields would go to all the time. So much about it makes sense, and yet this regime seems to want him even less than the last one did. So I expect that he'll get released at some point. And why would you give up a draft pick if you don't have to?
Yeah, there's no point in giving up a draft pick for Nick Foles when he's going to be gone. And I mean, yeah. What sort of timeline do you think this is after the draft? They just cut him, or when is Nick Foles going to be on the street?
I can't believe they're that excited about Ryan Willis, and so even though Simeon's now the number 2, I guess you could keep him around. I mean, we don't know that there's probably going to be another, even though, Dr. Fauci says we're out of the pandemic stage, COVID is still, there's going to be some realities of it. I don't know. Maybe even if it has nothing to do with COVID, they may keep some of the roster, tricks that they did, and so there may be advantages. A lot of teams are going to be carrying 3 quarterbacks these days. I don't know if you can still stash those veterans on the practice squad the way they did. But it's not a guarantee that he's gone. It just seems very likely.
Let's see here. What are we at? 1:10. We're going to do one more question before we get out of here with the Propers Hub. And it's going to be from Dr. Earl. And I'm going to change it slightly for you, Dr. Earl. I'm sorry. But he said, if the Bears pick a receiver and an O-line in the second round, should they look at a 3 technique in the third round? I'll hang up and listen to my question. So, let's say that the Bears do land that wide receiver and offensive line that most people really would like, or offensive lineman that most people really would like to see in the second round, with those 2 picks. Not just 3 technique, but let's say, like I said, they get that wide receiver and offensive lineman. If you're the Bears, at that point, are you just going best player available, or is there another position, whether it's the 3 technique or safety hub, that you would prioritize tonight in the third round at 71?
Doc, listen. I get it. It's fun. It's what we enjoy about the draft, and it's the way fans approach it. It's not the way teams approach it. They're not looking at a certain position with a pick. And I got to tell you guys, if the Bears draft a quarterback at 39, I'm not going to have any issue with it. You should always be developing young quarterbacks. You're drafting the best players available. So regardless of what positions they draft at 39 and 48, they're just not going to be looking at a specific position at 71 or in any of these spots. Now the only place, Sean, where this comes into play, and which is with almost every pick, is when you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 guys all with similar grades on your board. If you say, these guys, any one of them, we love them all, they're all going to be great, or we love them all, we can't guess at what the missing piece is that makes one of them great, then you're going to lean more towards an area of need. So I think Doc asked about the third round. So at 71, if you've got, 4 guys and one of them is a quarterback and one of them is a tight end and one of them is a receiver, and you've already taken 2, but that 4th one is a 3 technique, then yeah, you might lean towards the 3 technique, but they've got to be the best player available. And that's the only way you ever succeed at this.
Yeah, and a lot of what happens ahead of you plays into this too. Which positions, where are the runs, which positions are looking a little thinner, and which ones are a little more available when your pick comes up.
When you're a rebuilding team, pretty much any position should be on the table tonight.
Yeah, it has to be. And by the way, guys, not to go back to where we started, because I know it annoys people, but they do need to get a linebacker, because even if Roquan Smith is going to be a Bear for 12, 14 years, with the situation you're in right now, if you ignore that, you're counting on Nicholas Morrow being a great match for him and being really good at the inside linebacker position, but you don't even know if you have 2 starters right now, and you don't have a built-in starter at the Sam backer. And so, if there's an inside linebacker that you love, it almost is high. It's not a priority, but it's higher on the priority list than other positions that you wouldn't expect because you have Roquan Smith. Because again, he has all the leverage right now. He's a great young man. He said he wants to stay in Chicago. I believe him. He's extremely bright. He's capable of representing himself, but not in season. And so if you get through training camp and you don't have a new deal with him, then you got a problem there. And so the draft is where you address that in advance. And you never have too much talent at any one position. I would
prioritize linebacker over cornerback and three technique.
You saw, Tennessee and Baltimore did not have an embarrassment of riches at the position, but you saw what they did with wide receivers last night. And so, linebacker it's in the mid-range of needs for the Bears. It's not at the top, but it's not at the bottom either.
I'm going to throw this up here. CJ just popped in. So if Dean falls, do you choose him over, say, offensive line or wide receiver at 39? If Nakobe Dean somehow falls to 39, the Bears should run up on stage as quickly as humanly possible and had that card in.
There is no doubt in my mind that Nakobe Dean would be the best player available at 39, and that's just consistent with what we're talking about here. Now, obviously, a lot of experts disagree with me because if he falls to 39, there's going to be a reason for it. But based on my evaluation, that's absolutely what you do.
All right, Hub, let's go ahead and get out of here.
All righty, guys. Well, thank you all so much for being with us. I don't want to be redundant or bat you over the head with it. But we just want to make sure everybody knows. We don't know at what point you might be joining us. If you're with us live, you know that we do this traditionally every Friday morning at 9:30 Chicago time, and then it is saved as a podcast. So you can join us live and participate, as so many of our friends did this morning, by going to YouTube or going to any one of our Twitter accounts at Sean_Hammond, at Kyle Nabors, at Hub_Arkush, or as we said, go to YouTube. And if you prefer to listen to it as a podcast, that's great, but make sure you get to the App Store on your phone or iTunes or shawlocal.com and download your subscription so it comes to you every week. Stay with us at shawlocal.com, at least, well, we hope permanently, but at least for the next 36 to 48 hours, because we don't even know what we're going to be posting yet, but all the best draft coverage and all the best Bears draft coverage is going to be posted right there. And beyond that, for now, well, just watch the Twitter accounts, because we haven't even talked about this yet, but as much fun as this was, Kyle, I don't know if we want to wait until next Friday to go again. Maybe we do a wrap up earlier in the week. We'll talk about that and see what we're going to do.
Yeah, CJ just popped in and asked about that, and we'll talk about it a little bit more off air here. But I would expect to see us really early in the week next week. We don't want to make everyone wait until Friday. We'll be back to talk about Bears football.
Yeah, can't do it Sunday because we're all married. But we will get to it sometime early next week. So keep an eye on those Twitter accounts. One more time, it's at Sean_Hammond. It's at Kyle Nabors. It's at Hub_Arkush. Guys, we hope you have a great weekend, and we know you're going to spend a lot of it trying to enjoy this draft. We wish the Bears luck. We hope it's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll be here to report on it for you 24/7 and back to visit with you early next week.